I'd like to call this meeting of the Douglas County Planning Commission to order and ask Bryce to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's time for opening public comment, and it's limited to 3 minutes per speaker on matters over which the Planning Commission has jurisdiction. The Planning Commission wants to encourage respectful consideration of all views by members of the public. If content is disruptive, disrespectful, irrelevant, or offensive, the individual will be asked to stop speaking. Public comment will also be taken on agenda items that are identified for possible action, and we will have closing public comment. I will now open public comment. Please sign the roster, say your name for the record, into the microphone. First speaker, please. Hello,
Thank
Hope.
you. Hope Sullivan, East Valley, and I'm afraid I can't stay for the meeting, so I'll give you my comments, and I'm sure Derek will be great. Transfer of development rights relies on sending and receiving areas. You send the development rights from a property you seek to protect to an area you want development. The sending land becomes open space or protected land. The county has mapped the receiving areas, but not the sending areas. If the objective is open space protection, then the sending areas need to be identified, or at least the characteristics of those sending areas. This can't be done until the county agrees on what land needs to be protected. Is the objective to protect land in topaz? Is the objective to protect exclusively ag land? Or do we want to protect hazardous land consistent with the hazard mitigation plan? TDRs are not the only tool available to protect land. In the 1990s, some of you may remember a book came out called Rural by Design by Randall Arendt. This book advocated the use of clustering to protect the preservation of land. This is essentially applying the planned unit development tool, a tool that's far easier to use than the TDR. And I would suggest as you have this discussion, ask Tom Dallaire, he's a really smart guy, what's easier, the planned unit development or the TDR to administer? I suspect more land's been protected in this county through the planned development than through TDRs. Rather than trying to perfect an ineffective tool, pause. Focus on the objective. If you go to Home Depot, do you go to Home Depot and buy a bunch of tools and then come home and say, gee, I wonder what I'll build? Or do you decide what you want to build and then go get your tools? We need to figure out what land we're trying to protect. That sending area. This needs to be a community conversation. Perhaps the sending area could be an overlay zone. In lieu of TDRs, perhaps an overlay zone mandates clustering, utilizing the planned unit development. I don't know. But let's pause and articulate the objectives. Once the objectives are agreed upon, ask the consultant. Derek just won the Planner of the Year in 2024 for the state of Nevada. Ask him, what would be our best tools to utilize based on this objective? Thank you.
Thank you, Hope. Next speaker.
Jim Slade. The TDR process certainly has its merits and has so far preserved over 4,000 acres. That's a good thing. But the program clearly has flaws. It's not been very successful in recent years, but that's mainly due to the Great Recession that started in '07 and the after effects that lasted until 2014. Then as housing finally started to pick up again, we had COVID. Would have been helpful, I think, to have the number of acres preserved by SNPLMA funds also be listed in this agenda. That program's been great for our county and hopefully will continue. I'm glad that on page 9, it's mentioned that the development goal to preserve the community appearance, charm, and character, which are all important to the quality of life here. Also mentions the master plan goal to retain the beauty, resources, and rural agricultural character of the county, all of which are so important to the vast majority of our residents. Page 10 shows that the master plan goal to, quote, keep growth in Douglas County to a sustainable level that natural and fiscal resources can support. Even now, our most valuable resource, water, is an issue, especially in the Ruinstroth and Johnson Lane areas where some wells have already gone dry. The county's fiscal resources as well are stretched, with a deficit of around $5 million for road maintenance, with traffic becoming more and more of an issue. The worst board decision this century that was the legally dubious transfer of receiving area from South County to the heart of the Carson Valley, despite residents' comments running 50-1 against it. This was a windfall giveaway to Park Ranch Holdings worth tens of millions of dollars. We already had over 4,000 new homes in the pipeline before adding 2,200 more. That combined 6,000 plus homes will increase the population by around 15,000, with nearly that many cars, along with an enormous increase in water usage. This will not only lower the quality of life here, lead to further water shortages and traffic congestion, and stress county finances even further, since many studies have shown that growth doesn't pay for itself. Don't just look at the benefits of TDRs, but take into account the real costs of receiving area growth. Remember, only a small group of large landowners benefit from receiving areas and from the sale of TVRs, while everyone else feels the negative impacts of growth. My suggestions: don't create any more receiving area until the backlog of approved housing is considerably lower. Utilize clustering. Don't allow further development in the primary floodplain. Separate the valleys and don't allow TDRs to be sent from one valley to the other. That should also allow the supply and demand to set a reasonable value in the Carson Valley without having to increase TDR valuations 3 times. Finally, regarding the TDR versus land values chart on page 18, don't forget that the land sale would have substantial tax implications, whereas the TDRs would allow the homeowner to continue to own and work the land.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else?
I'm Dan Greenlee from the East Valley area. I've been in this valley for 35 plus years, been coming to some of these meetings for almost nearly as long. The originally proposed TDR were to protect the green belt, the ag irrigated land along our Carson Valley here. And at the time I went to the various commissioner meetings where this was discussed, and I personally supported it at that time. Since then, it seems like it's just getting a lot of lip service. And as already been pointed out, the most recent use of TDRs was to transfer development rights off the Sleeping Elephant Ranch down in TRE up here to Park Ranch and Cattle Company. It's totally turning the concept of TDR on its head. It saved sagebrush and built over ag irrigated land. The idea that TDR is going to save us from, from the development, create open space is certainly questionable at this point. I think the county, when they're looking at the TDR, I'll cut to the chase on this, should identify areas that are worth saving. They should identify the areas that they're going to transfer it off. If it's something that we want to save, we should pursue that, identify that, and put it out for the public to know. I think there needs to be transparency by all parties, including the citizens that are funding this. It's our tax dollars and our community that are at risk. And I think the county needs to follow through and actually to preserve and protect this. This planning commission just a few months ago went in and bought an easement and then turned it into a flood control basin. The easement was supposed to offset the growth that was allowed within that plan unit development area. In your wisdom, you decided to go ahead and buy it, dig a hole, And now we got a hole out there with a bunch of weeds on it. And that's not what people want with open space easement. It's not what I want with open space easement. And it goes to the core of the problem of how the county is going to be a good steward of the land when they buy these places or when they have the option to have these places. And right now, your track record, in my opinion, is lacking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Seeing no one rise, I will close public comment. I would also like to acknowledge those who didn't speak today but sent in public comment. And I would like to acknowledge and welcome all the members of the Technical Advisory Committee who are present today and publicly thank them for participating in the process and for their commitment and contributions to putting together the TDR study that we have before us today. Also, before we begin, I'd like to introduce Kate Morales O'Neill, who would like to say a few words and also address what happens after the PC considers what's going on and after we finish our review. Kate?
Thank you.
My vice chair, he's so wonderful, reminds me I have to approve the agenda and the minutes. I'm so excited to get into this. May we have approval of the agenda? Are there
Madam
any
Chair, I
changes?
approve the agenda.
Second?
Second.
We have a motion by Bryce, second by Lori. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Perfect. Approval of the minutes. Are there any changes? No minutes. Wonderful. Move on from there. Now, Kate, please, let's get going.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Commissioners, everyone in attendance today. Kate O'Neill, Planning Division. I just wanted to give a brief overview of how we got here. Back in 2022, I started here at the county and I got a list of tasks from our fearless leader, Tom Dallaire, and on that list was a TDR study. So it is something that the county has been wanting to evaluate for a number of years. Understanding some of the public comments that you heard today are valid. Just, you know, we have to either revamp the program or take a good hard look at it, see where the values are of TDR, see where we can do better, the sending areas versus the receiving areas, where are those coming from. So the first thing we did once we were able to do the RFQ and contracted with Wood Rogers, we developed the Technical Advisory Committee, which consisted of current and past TDR owners, ranchers, farmers who have open space availability, and then a lot of people in the community that are very familiar with our TDR program. Their input and communications we had were very valuable just to get that type of feedback. After today, so what we're looking at for today, you're going to get a presentation from Derek at Wood Rogers and Jen from Leland Consulting. They have a PowerPoint that will explain where we are in the study and what we have learned thus far, some recommendations. This is just presentation only, so our parameters are, here's where we are. We want your feedback. If the TAC members or members of the public after the presentation would like any following comments, we welcome those also. Once we have kind of direction and comments from the Planning Commission and where we leave today, then we will eventually get to the final report that will go to the Board of County Commissioners that we anticipate by the end of the year. So that's where we are today. I just wanted to kind of give a brief synopsis of where we are and how we got here. And at this time, I'm going to invite Derek and Jen up to do the presentation after Bryce asks his question.
Okay, I need to read this into the record. Item 1 for presentation only. Presentation and discussion on transfer of development rights TDR study that commenced in September of 2023. Wood Rogers will be giving an overview of the study, the progress and findings, the collaboration utilized during the study and recommendations to future pathways for the TDR program. Derek Kirkland, Wood Rogers Incorporated, and Jennifer Schutch, Leland Consulting presenting. You may begin. Thank you.
You want to run it? Good afternoon, members of the Planning Commission. Derek Kirkland with Wood Rogers, and I have here Jennifer with me as well from Leland Consulting. So we had kind of a whole group of consultants working on this. Obviously, TDRs aren't something you come across every day, so we had a pretty diverse group with some economics consultants, FCS group, as well as Leland, who does a number of these types of planning projects across the West Coast. And then obviously Wood Rogers, we've done a lot of land use planning in Douglas County and around the area. So with that, we'll go ahead. So what we're going to be talking about today in our presentation is basically the progress we've gotten so far. We'll talk a little bit about the existing program, talk about some of the key findings from our research, and then we'll be talking about future pathways and kind of next steps, and then obviously a discussion. And everything we're presenting today, definitely want to get your feedback and looking forward to it, kind of where we're at in the process. So as Kate kind of mentioned, so the TDR program review was one of the first things we did. We sat down with staff, kind of went through everything they were hoping to get out of it, and we had our initial TAC meeting about April 2024 after we had done some existing research on the program. Got a lot of feedback from the TAC, and then we moved into stakeholder interviews, and also Jennifer and myself had some expert interview with other communities and other departments around the country that also have TDR programs to kind of learn some of what they do and how they do it and why they do it. And then we came up with some initial recommendations based on all the interviews and the TAC feedback. And then we entered into the financial analysis, which we will talk a little bit about today in our presentation. And then we moved into our second TAC meeting, where we had kind of a roundtable discussion about some of the draft recommendations, learned a little bit more about ideas from the TAC members and things that may or may not work, and kind of what we'll show today is some of the kind of these revised or kind of the draft recommendations that we're presenting at this Planning Commission workshop. Going forward from here, our goal is to take all the feedback from this, sort of like a TAC meeting, and go back from the public comment, from Planning Commission comments, and update our recommendations based on staff direction from those comments. We'll be preparing a final report that will then come back to Planning Commission for review and or approval, and then would move on to the Board of County Commissioners after that. So looking at the current program, obviously there's a lot of goals that feed into this program. And so this program is one part of the larger master plan for the county, and some of the key goals that we found just in the development code and the master plan. Obviously protecting the community's character. It's a great place, a lot of historic value, a lot of agriculture. It's very unique for Nevada and the West Coast, honestly. So I think that's an important one. Obviously enhancing property values, looking at population and where concentrations of population are, avoiding the overcrowding of land. And then from a land use perspective, we really want to look at managed growth and how that plays into this program. And also the agriculture and conservation, obviously a key component in protecting that. We also looked at some housing goals and looking at the other part of the program in a little bit more depth. We want to see some growth, but it's sustainable levels and areas where it should be, close to utilities and close to where there's other communities, avoiding sprawling developments that are taking up some of the area that we don't want to see it in. And then also some of the other goals were awareness of affordable housing, but also like not just affordable housing, obviously has a lot of different meanings to it in some degree, but also home ownership opportunities as well, where people work in the community, service jobs especially, where are they going to live, how do they support the community, and then increasing opportunities for households with special needs was the other one in there as well. When we looked at the existing TDR program, we actually worked with the University of Nevada, Reno, and we worked with a lot of Douglas County staff to basically create a map of the existing TDR program. So the existing program was adopted in 1996. The sending areas currently are defined as A19 and FR19 zoning districts. So there's specific zoning districts, which in the map are basically all the purple areas. And then basically there was, under the current program, it does give you some incentives for preserving in the floodplain, but this whole program is market driven. So basically the purple areas up there that you see and the blue ones that you see are the areas that have already been conserved through the TDR program over the last several years, which, as that number was mentioned earlier, about just over 4,000 acres. And then the red areas are basically the receiving areas. And so the way it works now is basically somebody who wants to build a house in a receiving area would go look for these TDRs. So it's all market driven. Someone would come to the county or someone word of mouth would go acquire those transfer development rights. They're certified by Douglas County, and then they can be used in a receiving area. And so, and the minimum sending site size for that is 40 contiguous acres. So if somebody came in with 20 acres, they would not be allowed to utilize the TDR program as it exists today. And so that just gives you kind of a highlight. Obviously, going back to 1996, some of the data, there's obviously some gaps in data, but we feel pretty good about a lot of the effort that went into this to kind of create this as a starting point. And obviously we don't show the whole county up here, but it just gives you an idea of just some of the mapping exercises we went through. And it was Wood Rogers GIS department, University of Nevada, and then Douglas County GIS department that kind of all got together and with staff and try to figure out kind of the basis of this. And I think that's one of the recommendations you'll see is from a transparency perspective, and also just looking at the program as a whole is the data collection is improving upon that, so we can see where things are coming from, where they're going, and I'll let Jennifer talk about that here in a minute.
So I'm going to go through some of our key findings, but I also just want to touch on what the existing process is right now if you were to follow the life of a TDR. So a landowner who wants to preserve some of their land through the program would file an application that complies with the county requirements. The county would then review that application, make sure that it's in compliance, and then confirms that the calculation of TDRs with the applicable bonuses is correct. The owner presents and records a deed restriction or perpetual open space easement to the county, and the county issues that certificate of eligibility. So when we're talking about TDRs, it's really that certificate that we're talking about. And then the landowner who received that certificate, they don't get paid until a developer or some third party purchases that certificate from them. So a developer will come in, purchase that certificate, and then record the certificate and provide copies to the community development department when they're putting their site plan together, and the county maintains those records. For stakeholder engagement, I'm going to move this closer. Okay. For stakeholder engagement, we had a technical advisory committee. As Kate mentioned, it had a lot of community members on it coming from a lot of different backgrounds. So, county commissioners, planning commissioners, people representing Minden and Gardnerville and the Ranchos, landowners. We really tried to get a lot of input from folks who know about the community and know how this program works. We also interviewed some developers to get their perspective and to get information that was then used in the financial analysis that FCS did. And then we talked to program managers and experts from a variety of communities that have similar programs. So King County, Washington, the Pinelands in New Jersey, Catitas County, Washington, Summit County, Colorado, and then also TRPA. We heard from the people that we talked to a number of benefits and challenges. So a big benefit of the program is liquidity. Ranching is not always the most, lucrative activity. A lot of times your wealth is tied up in your land. This is an opportunity to get some of that liquidity out of your land. Tax planning, we heard from some folks who were talking about how, they want to leave land to the next generation, and they don't want to leave that next generation with this, huge tax burden. And by recording an easement, it can lower that tax burden. Market-based transactions is a big program benefit. That's something that we heard from all folks across the spectrum was, we like that the landowner and the developer get together, negotiate the price of the TDR. We don't want the county coming in and telling us what price the TDR should be. We want to have that private negotiation where we decide on the price. So that was something that people really liked. Also, it's targeted preservation in perpetuity. Once you record one of these easements, that land is preserved forever. Whereas, there may be other types of conservation that could be subject to change in the future. This is permanent. And then from the developer perspective, it also provides density bonuses to build in receiving areas. There were a lot of challenges with the program. I think everybody who spoke today articulated some of these challenges really well. So transparency, uncertainty, and access to information. This is what Derek was talking about, where there needs to be a publicly available information on this program, where it's been used, how it's working, and how landowners and developers can utilize it. Expertise, because there was such a long time where this program wasn't used, there was some feeling that there was a need for the county to kind of understand the program better. I really applaud the work that Kate and Andrea and Tom have done through this process. They've been digging through all sorts of records and archives to find out about how this program has been used, how it works, and it's just been great to have their help. High land values, that's a really big challenge with this program. Right now, land values in Douglas County are very, very high, and TDRs can't really compete from a price perspective. So if you're a landowner and you're thinking, do I want to sell my land either now or in the future, or do I want to save it in perpetuity and it can never be built on? From a price perspective, probably you're going to lean toward selling your land unless you know that your future generations are going to want to ranch it. Consistency of application of this program. We've heard, there's some feeling in the community that maybe there were instances where there was a project that didn't have the right amount of TDRs that got approved, or a project that didn't get approved. And consistency of application is kind of the basis of this program. If developers and ranchers and landowners don't think it's going to be applied as written, then there's no real incentive to participate. Infrastructure is a challenge. We heard that from some of the folks that gave testimony earlier, that there's a question about the receiving areas and whether they can accommodate the housing that they're planned for. Sending and receiving area locations, I think we've heard a bit about that already as well. And then permitting timeline and processes, that's again from a developer perspective. Time is money for developers, so if there's something that's adding time or complexity to a process, there's less incentive to develop, which means that there's less incentive to use this program that preserves land. when we talked to the experts, they were pretty much in agreement with a lot of what we've heard from the feedback so far. Best practices, the first bucket that we have is simplicity and transparency. So making sure that there's marketing about the program, that there's publicly available information, that there are opportunities to educate the public on how the program works and why it's beneficial. And then also making sure that there's a predictable supply of development rights. There's a bucket that one of the experts we talked to called institutional fortitude. So that's the kind of political and administration side of it, making sure that the goals of the program are clear and that everybody's on board with those so that the program can work as well as it should. And then aligning with growth. This is that tricky equation part of it where you want to make sure that the program's aligned with local conditions. So when you have an imbalance like the land prices versus the TDR prices, there needs to be a way to get that into alignment. So I know there's a lot of text on this slide. So this was from FCS, gave us some high-level takeaways from their financial analysis. The final report will include more details on the financial analysis, but we didn't want to put a bunch of spreadsheets in front of you today. So there are layers of development constraints, which means that adding TDR to those layers of development constraints means that development in Douglas County is challenging. And I know that there's a lot of goals aimed at sustainable, slower growth here. But again, this program doesn't really work if there's no demand. So just, that is a concern from a financial perspective. There's the high cost of land, which I've already talked about. The TDR market right now is constrained, even though you saw all that purple land in the map of where people could be participating in the program. There aren't a lot of folks currently participating in the program. So there's not that supply that needs to be there. The market is the market, which is another way of saying that there's market forces that the county's not going to be able to change. Things like, land prices is not something that the county is going to be able to do anything about, nor do I think most people would want them to. Whether there's a recession, like one of the commenters earlier was talking about. But those factors will all impact the TDR program because of the impacts on development market. Incentives, so we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the next slides, but because of the imbalance between the sale prices of land and the values of TDRs right now, there can be ways to change the value of the TDR. That is not to say that the county would come in and say TDRs are worth X dollars now, but you can say a TDR is worth more units, especially if it's from somewhere that is really important to preserve. So those are options for kind of leveling that equation. And then strategic planning. Next year, there's going to be a kickoff of the master plan process. There's going to be an opportunity to go into some of those community plans, do some assessments of where the county wants to see development, where it does not want to see development, getting public input on those. So that's going to be a big part of this. So based on the analysis that FCS conducted, right now, from the information that we have and acknowledging that markets are always changing and the last TDR sale was a while back, the sale price of land is worth about 4 times more than what a TDR is going for. So this is, pretty heavily caveated with this is based on current market information that we were able to get from people who've participated in the program. Because these are private transactions, that could change, but if you're looking at, 140 TDRs at $5,000 each, you're getting about $700,000 for those TDRs. If the owner outright sells the land, which again, they'd still be able to work the land with a TDR. If they sell the land, they can't. But if they sold the land to the developer, they could get about $3 million. And so that's when we talk about that imbalance, that is, even if you don't want to sell your land today, if you want to continue ranching, if you think that your kids don't want to ranch, or you think, maybe when I retire in 20, 30 years, I'm not going to want to ranch anymore and I can make more money if this is buildable land, there's a real incentive to not participate in the TDR program, which is a challenge. We want to make sure that this land is getting preserved. So when we talk about TDR and land value imbalance, if the county did decide to increase the price of a TDR, again, they don't have the power to do that. We're not recommending that they do that. But if they did, they said, okay, instead of $5,000, now TDRs are worth $20,000. And they didn't change the incentives for that. There would be a decreased developer demand for TDRs. And again, the landowners who preserve their land don't get paid until somebody pays them for their TDR. So that means that there's less incentive to build or to participate in the program from landowners. There's less housing built in receiving areas, less preservation of sending areas. But if you increase the value of a TDR by incentivizing some high priority areas that you determine through that master planning process, and saying, okay, if you go from the Carson Valley floodplain, and now that's worth three housing units instead of one, you can increase developer demand because now a TDR is worth more to them, and you get more housing built in receiving areas and more land preservation, which I know is a big goal of this program. Okay, I'm going to hand it back to Derek to talk about some of the future pathways.
All right, so through some of our research, through working with the TAC, through a lot of interviews, we basically developed a series of alternatives. And so we wanted to look at kind of a broad range. So some of the things that we looked at, and these were presented at the last TAC, was basically the do nothing alternative where there's no change, things just keep going as they are today. We looked at kind of a smaller option, which is like maybe there's some administrative changes where we look at transparency, we look at how the program's being administered, and maybe there's some changes there that could help. And then we looked at an option that would include option one, but also include more of a program overhaul, which would include looking at sending and receiving areas through like a master plan amendment and going with a full kind of overhaul. The other options we looked at was basically a TDR sunset where the program goes away. And then we looked at an option 4 where the program were to sunset, it would go away, but in its place would be left with community plan updates, which is, I believe, kind of what Hope was referring to. And so there, in that case, it would be left up to land use tools rather than the transfer development rights program. I think one of the things that we heard loud and clear from the technical advisory committee and just kind of our own recommendations was that the TDR program, the fact that it's preserved 4,000 acres so far is a successful program. Why get rid of that? Douglas County is one of the few places in the country that has the program. And while, maybe it's time for a reset, we didn't feel like it was a good idea to just sunset the program or get rid of it. And so I think where everyone landed so far, again, we're here to discuss this, but where everyone's landed so far is basically the TAC preferred a phased approach, combining options 1 and 2. Maybe there's some things we can do administratively to clean things up while we move into the master plan process and really dive deeper into the sending and receiving areas. And then we also discussed, and we'll get into here in a minute, just some of these, some other opportunities with conservation and incentives. So some of these just kind of overview of these. Obviously, when we look at these program changes, nothing happens overnight, and there's obviously a cost to that. So administrative changes, time to implement, it probably takes a year or two, but it's something that could be initiated relatively quickly. fairly low cost, mainly administrative and working with staff on some possible ways to accomplish that. And then really the issue that we're addressing there is transparency, excuse me, and really educating people about the program, trying to promote it more so people understand what the benefits are and what their opportunities are. And then phase 2 would start your overhaul program, which is probably takes a little bit longer. Obviously, that would include be part of the master plan process, which, diving deeper, I mean, that can take a few years to do that. And then it's, relative high cost to go through those processes because they take so long. But at the end of the day, we'd be kind of touching that transparency, the education, but diving deeper into the sending and receiving areas. And phase 3, recommendation is basically once you get through, you kind of modified the sending and receiving areas, is really start to target infrastructure planning on where you want development, put together some medium and long range infrastructure plans where you could start applying for grant funds and maybe try to incentivize development in those areas so that the development in those areas are now buying TDRs and maybe areas that we want them to buy TDRs in. Some of the administrative changes, again, these just kind of going through. I think one of the big things we saw was, TDRs are basically a certificate, right? And so the administrative process is timely and it takes up a lot of staff resources and time. One of the things that we saw from some of our expert research was actually a lot of people have like a database, and each TDR that's created ends up with a unique identifier, which means once that's used, it can be tracked through the system. So basically, once it's created, when it gets that certificate, it gets a unique identifier. And then as that TDR moves through the system, it's not tracked. It could be sold 3 or 4 times. But at the end of the day, once it comes back and it's used, that there's part of that spreadsheet shows that it knows where that unique identifier came from and it knows where it's being used, so it can't be used multiple times in the system. So that seemed like the quick win to try to clean up from an administrative perspective, but also being mindful of staff resources and time and setting up a database that's, they don't have to track individual sales of TDRs, but once that a TDR is created, it does get a unique identifier. Obviously, there's like a website and a web page that you could do to really help with the transparency. People can go there. And then one of the other things we looked at was sort of like a market-based, where the Douglas County is not controlling the market, but it has a web page or a user interface where people can see if I'm a developer coming to town, where do I go get a TDR? And so it starts to put the buyers and sellers together. But again, not linked to Douglas County, just something they put up and people voluntarily use it. I think we've seen some similar things with TRPA. If you're up at the lake and you're trying to do something, they have interfaces where you can go and you can figure out where to go get your TDRs. TRPA does have a database that's already in place. They've already paid for the infrastructure to basically the cost to build that. And so there could be a potential way where Douglas County could leverage an already built system, not using TRPA's system, but using that infrastructure for Douglas County to build their own. And so there are some, and I guess you call that piggybacking on TRPA's contract with that database developer, which would save some costs. So there's things like that you could do that would help kind of expedite some of this and kind of keep those costs down. I think we talked about this. And so these are just some examples of what some of the other people are doing to help educate people on the benefits of the program and basically the transparency of it. The program overhaul, again, a whole bunch of different options here, but really this program overhaul would be tied to the master plan, because the master plan is where ultimately those sending and receiving areas are identified. And so you would have to basically go through the master plan amendment process, which is coming up, to determine where we want to make changes to the sending and receiving areas. So at this point, it would be more of recommendations for maybe areas to look at, but the ultimate map changes to those areas would mostly come with the master plan amendment process or a master plan update. And there could be everything from removing certain sending areas, removing certain receiving areas, modifying the boundaries of those, and a lot of that would be based on infrastructure and where do we want the future growth to be. Where do we foresee infrastructure improvements? Where can it handle it? And so those would be a much deeper dive into those. And then obviously looking at the TDR values and looking at potential incentives for where, like the flood zone in the Carson Valley, if you're protecting ag land and floodplain, do you get a higher yield on those TDRs? So maybe the landowners can charge more because you're going to get more, but then the developer's okay paying a higher cost because they can use it. They can use one TDR for 3 units in a desirable area. So there's a whole bunch of different factors there, but we feel like that's probably, from an overall perspective, is kind of where we think it would need to go in order to try to create that balance between the buyer and the seller and preserving ag land and putting growth in a sustainable area. Next slide, please. And also on that one, we could look at some, there could be some restrictive zoning. I think Hope talked about overlay districts and certain things you could look at as well. But I think as of right now, the way the TDR market, and I think a lot of people express interest in it, is it's more of a market-based program. So we're not telling you, a landowner, that you can never build here. We're asking you to basically, help us preserve it. And so there could be cases, and maybe there's a balance of keeping the market base, but also adding in some additional zoning to limit development in those areas to maybe encourage them to sell some of the TDRs. And then the next recommendations would be kind of that infrastructure assessments, especially when we get into the sending and receiving areas, is really needing to look really hard at where, based on the capital improvement programs and where we see growth occurring, is what needs to happen and where should these receiving areas be based on obviously current programs. And really looking at ways to get grant funds and other things to help maybe put in some of that infrastructure to relieve some of the burden on the developers and keep Douglas County kind of moving in the direction of the receiving area, and enticing those developers to go purchase TDRs and use them in these areas. Again, some of the alternatives that were approached, and we put these in here mainly, they were some of the things that were discussed. A universal TDR application was brought up where basically, the sending and receiving areas go away and you basically have a 1-for-1. So basically, if I'm going to build a house, I have to bring in a TDR. We see that there's a lot of issues with that. One being that it doesn't really align with the goals, and so we've kind of outlined a little bit here. Probably the biggest one is avoid undesirable concentrations of population. If you take away the sending and receiving areas, you basically open it up and it's a free-for-all. And if I want to go build, a 5-house subdivision over here, 20 houses over here, 50 houses over here, there's nothing that prevents me from doing that, other than working with zoning. I could come in with a master plan, zone change, and then bring in my TDRs, and so you start to limit. It goes against that sustainable growth. I think that also kind of hinders the overcrowding, because now you're going to start taxing your infrastructure, because if I want to go build 5 houses over here and I can extend some of the infrastructure, and the county's going to maintain it eventually, it starts to create ultimately sprawl. Which I think having the sending and receiving areas really targets where you want to preserve, and it targets where you want the growth to occur. And so I think if you took that away and just went for a 1-to-1, you would really end up hurting yourself probably more than helping the program. We also felt like, again, in terms of managed growth and preserving agriculture, if people are going to buy TDRs and it's a 1-to-1, someone that's trying to sell their land is probably going to have a reduced land value, because it's going to be harder to buy land, because I have to bring in TDRs and then go find land to buy. I think it's going to create a lot of problems in terms of managing growth. It's also very expensive and I think hard to track on an administrative purpose as well. And I don't know that it would give you the benefits of actually preserving the area that you want to preserve. And I think that's summarized a little bit here. cost of the county long term from infrastructure probably takes a hit because you're going to have a lot more subdivisions spread out. You're going to see growth in areas you probably don't want it to occur. And then for a lot of people, probably discouraging home ownership because the cost of every single house is going to go up because you got to go find a TDR. Harder to do. So that's a little bit of an overview of, we did look at that program, didn't see a whole lot of value in it. Our thought is it'd still make more sense to look at the current program administratively and then look at the sending and receiving areas and modify those before you actually went to a one-to-one. The other thing that's been brought up and could have some merit is basically separating the valleys. Obviously, there's, when you look at, there was talk of about like in-basin transfers and things like that. Our thought was, rather than looking at basins, you would just create TDR boundaries, more or less, where you would look at areas, you could separate them out, and so you could only use TDRs in certain areas. But what we came up with and thought might be a better consideration would be to create these incentive programs where if we're not going to dictate, market driven, we're not going to dictate where you can get your TDR, but if you get your TDR from a certain area, it's going to be worth a whole lot more, which makes the value of the TDR to the landowner worth more, but also the developer is going to probably lean towards buying a higher value TDR from the Carson Valley opposed to going to kind of Topaz and maybe Topaz is the TDR is worth 1 unit, but Carson Valley, where you have ag land flood, maybe that's worth 3 units. And so you create this incentive program where you're not discouraging people from preserving the areas that you want to preserve, but you are incentivizing them to preserve the areas that we really want to preserve first. And then that wouldn't preclude somebody from Topaz from using a TDR. It's just not worth as many units. And so I think this is just kind of highlighting that example where we could, rather than, having everything, that purple color is all A19, FR19 zones are sending areas, is kind of to what Hope was speaking to, is we could start to define different levels of receiving or sending areas. We could define different levels of receiving areas, and we could create this incentive program so that overall the TDR program stays market driven, stays incentive driven, and provides incentives for people to preserve different areas, but we're not precluding anyone from preserving something we still want preserved. And obviously up for discussion on what that would look like, and we'd still have to do some more research if that's something that is desirable, but that was definitely one area we thought would be definitely an advantage. So I think some of the questions for consideration I think we're looking for today from Planning Commission, members of the public. Obviously, we have TAC members here too, so we'd love more feedback from them. But what are your thoughts on the TDR program today? Are the goals still relevant? I think that's the first thing we're thinking about is there a goal that's different today than there was even in 2020 master plan, which would impact the program? Any questions, concerns, thought about the recommendations? Other recommendations maybe we haven't thought about that we should consider. We talked a lot about incentives and the idea of incentives. Are there other incentives out there that maybe you've thought about that we could look at? And then just thoughts on the sending and receiving areas. Does that recommendation, is that something that this board feels, or this commission feels very strong about, looking at that going forward? And are there other interests in kind of limiting development in certain areas? So it's kind of where we're at. I know it's a lot. There's a lot more that went into all this, but I think we're here, and that's why we wanted to do the Planning Commission workshop, was to really do some outreach and get some feedback before we move into the next phase, which is developing the report and the draft recommendations that will come back to this commission at some point. And with
Thank you
that,
very much.
Yep.
I'd like to acknowledge Commissioner Hales and Commissioner Gardner. I hope you're listening carefully, and I hope we don't step on your toes or making our comments. Thank you. Are there questions or comments from the commissioners? Jim?
It's almost difficult to consider this outside of considering the master plan, because any changes would require changes in the master plan. I, for one, would like to see more requirements for TDRs. I like the idea of when you preserve land in certain areas, it's worth more than in other areas. I think that's a good idea. I think I'm looking at, because I live in the ranchos, and I kind of look at a lot of this from that standpoint. We have a lot of receiving area. Probably looked like a really good idea in 1996 that this would be a great area to grow. The problem is there's been a lot of growth since then and no real connector roads. People in growth would have to go through, for example, residential roads to get to new development. So the thoughts on what's a good place to grow may be different now than, 30 years ago. So I think that there's a lot of things that have to be done with the master plan to make changes in the TDR program work. Because I think we do need to change it. We do need to create more demand for TDRs that'll raise their value. They could be more valuable to the ranchers. We don't think we're ever going to get to a point where it's more profitable to sell TDRs than to sell your land. We're hoping as people that want to continue to ranch but need to get some revenue now would benefit from this and help keep the ranches going in the short term, and hope that that value will preserve land, because I think that's something the public's very interested in, is preserving more land. We don't want to be San Fernando Valley. We don't want massive growth. We understand there will be growth. I know residents look at a piece of empty land owned by somebody and think, well, that should always be vacant, and it's not going to be that. But I think we need to get more out of the TDR program by creating more demand for it. And I think we can do that by requiring more, and we need to take a look at the borders of receiving areas. When a developer comes to a board and says, well, this is a great deal because I could put 16 homes per acre. Well, you can't put 16 homes per acre. There's height restrictions. It doesn't work, but it's kind of a threat to a board, a town, or a GID. So I think we need to redefine receiving areas, and whether we really need receiving areas or whether we should just say, you're going to put a development in, you're going to have TDRs. So it's just kind of difficult to think about the changes we need to make without making changes in the master plan at the same time. Thank you.
Dan?
I guess we're going down the line here. Well, when I get into a new topic like this, and being a new member of this commission, it is new to me. I always ask, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And as I review the material, my first conclusion is, wow, this was a very successful program back in the day. I mean, 4,000 acres of conserved land is nothing to sneeze at. So I want to start with that positive. But as I read through the materials, I struggled a little bit to determine what is it that we're trying to solve. And I think one of the commenters earlier, I loved her analogy of when you go to Home Depot, do you buy the tool and then come home and figure out whether you're going to use that tool for your purpose? No, you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or Ranch Supply, knowing what tool you want to buy. And those of us who've been around local government for a long part of our career, or in and out on both sides of it, you realize that yeah, there's some really fine goals, but aren't there other tools to achieve these goals? And didn't this tool work for a while, and now it's not working because of market or whatever? And then my last thought was, how many landowners are we really talking about? I mean, as we talk about sending areas, and I'm thinking, is that like a half a dozen people? Do they control 80% of the sending area? I mean, are we really in this county talking about a very small number of potential property owners? And then my thoughts go to, well, if there's just a handful of major potential or major property owners in the potential sending areas, shouldn't we just go talk to them and negotiate and figure out what's on their mind and, develop a program that kind of fits the market that we're targeting? And so sometimes I wonder if maybe we're trying to develop a program that might work in a huge county with thousands of potential property owners that could participate, as opposed to Douglas County, which tends to be controlled by a much lower number of both sending area and people potentially developing on the receiving side. So again, I'm trying to look for the problem that we're trying to solve. Obviously, I am very much in favor of process improvements, and so the alternate phase one administrative changes, things that the staff thinks that they need to do to better deal with what we've got now, makes a lot of sense. But as my previous colleague just said about the sending areas and the receiving areas, maybe there's more planning that needs to be done. Maybe these receiving areas, maybe it would be more worthwhile to go through community planning efforts in those areas and try to determine what it is that the community really wants within these areas that we call high priority for development. And I could go on and on. We've got some good housing goals there. It would have been helpful for me as a new member here to get a little bit of a summary of how we're doing on those housing goals. As I look at them, I don't want to guess, but I'm wondering if we're doing as well as we thought we were going to do when we made them goals 20 years ago or whatever. And my background, I think a lot of you know me as a public works official, water resource guy, civil engineer, and so my background always takes me back to that sustainability questions, and one of our goals is to be sustainable. And yet I wonder, are we really being honest with our community? I mean, we, the county, are taking on responsibility for maintenance of these public facilities, notably roads, local roads, and yet we just had a report, 3 months ago, that shows that we are not meeting our responsibilities for maintaining the roads that we accepted from previous developers.
Dan, we need to pull everything back to the study in front of us, please.
That came up in here, and so it makes me wonder if don't we have bigger issues to deal with. I'm looking for where's the meat in this one, but where do we have issues that we really need to be working on? We heard from our public today that there's concerns on water resources. It was pointed out that we've got a $5 million deficit in local road maintenance, and we're wondering about how we're going to get more development in this county. I would just submit that there may be some higher priorities that we could be working on. Thank you.
I just wanted to let you know, when we give you the full report, we'll include some alternative preservation programs that could be used alongside a TDR program or instead. So you should be getting some more tools.
Well, thank you for that presentation. And I do appreciate all the effort that's gone in with the consultants and with the TAC. I mean, that's a lot of work that you presented on the screen. And I've been on the commission for about a little year and a half or so. And the TDR program has not really we haven't really implemented it a lot since I've been on the board. So I'm not as familiar with it as I should be. But I think this idea, one of my biggest concerns is the idea that we're going to go out to the community and say we have to incentivize growth so that we can preserve open space is a bit counterintuitive. And I think that that's, in our community, kind of a hard sell. I believe that a lot of residents, I live in an area that I would love to have open space TDRs preserved, but if I'm living in downtown Minden, I might not feel that same way. It may feel that these areas are for the people that have those really expensive houses on the other side of town, and so why should I support this? I kind of think that the idea of identifying better the receiving areas and the sending areas is essential. There's so many areas on that map that are just not going to develop. They're the sides of mountains, and the development potential on those sites is just basically zero. If there's one house in 40 acres, so be it. That's not going to be against our goals and our plan. But some of the areas that we do feel deserve preservation, and I think a lot of the residents out here like to see more cows than houses, so I think we'll try to preserve that. I think that those should have a higher priority somehow. And whether it's increasing the units per TDR or decreasing the units per TDR elsewhere, I think that maybe looking at going the other way so that the less valuable units are only worth a half a unit or something of that nature would make the community more supportive of these changes that we're looking at. And also on infrastructure planning, like Dan, I'm a product of local government for many years, and I have consistently in the past believed, and I will consistently in the future believe, that the existing residents of the county should not be subsidizing development at all. That development should pay its own way. And that may not be a popular opinion, but I feel that our residents have bought into our community with the idea that this is the community they want to live in, and asking them to build additional roads, additional sewers, additional water lines to support development that they may not agree with, I think that's going to be something that is difficult to support. So whether it is looking at the true cost of development and applying certain impact fees, which may also even include an open space impact fee, may be something that we actually add to our toolbox to try to address some of these issues that we're trying to come up with. So I know this is a lot of work. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg in all this work. I think this is an ongoing thing that we'll have to continue to come back to because, as you indicated, it's market-driven. As the markets change, conditions change, situations of property owners change, so it is definitely something that's going to continue to evolve. But I do appreciate all the effort you guys have put into it. I think it's a good start.
Thank you, Lori. Paul?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very valuable, at least in my opinion, a very valuable tool for us to ensure that development doesn't overtake the character of where we live and why we all may have moved here. I think that's very, very important. Development for development's sake, and I echo Commissioner Lyle's comment, is really not consistent with Douglas County's objectives as I understand it. When we have an opportunity, as we do with a TDR, so I don't think they should be abandoned in the slightest, but rather strengthened, and I'll talk about that in just a second. It's one of the tools that we should use as distinguished from rampant growth. So I echo the comments that I've heard about development paying for itself. As a matter of fact, several developments that have come before us that we approved, we required amenities for the surrounding neighborhood so that it actually increased the value of the properties, both for those that were purchasing in the given neighborhood and for the surrounding communities. Now, with respect to TDRs, I think that the greatest idea I've heard is a focus on the sending area. And the sending area value is critical because there are, as the comments have been heard, some sending areas that you wouldn't care because development would be so expensive, rational in accordance with all of the requirements of building in the first instance, it probably wouldn't get built. So the sending area is very important. Now, you gave us good guidance, and we also had a comment about The master plan. Master plan thus far has certain requirements. And in addition, you put up the other development requirements. And those could be strengthened a bit, in my opinion, so that you could identify those sending areas that would be worth more. And I put that in quotes because it's not really dollars, but it's probably in units. And how could you then make it incentivized for those that are in those sending areas that might be valuable? Well, what you could do, on one hand, is not have an absolute abandonment of any development right whatsoever. So you look at the easement, and you can craft an easement for that individual or entity that's selling it that doesn't render it 2 cows per acre, period, no full stop, nothing else you can do with that land. And that's a creativity on the easement side that was used in in my past that was very effective, because then you pass the requirement. In this case, it was orchards. I'll be very honest with you. And in this case, you would be able to use it for more than just orchards. But the easement went to the receiving area such that you had to have, development was all right, and you got certain units, but you had to have a heritage orchard or a buffer that had the trees on it, forest or whatever it may be. In that fashion, the TDR became kind of a tool that you could envision and then implement the kind of development you wanted in a particular place. And I think your comments about the use of TDR is just one tool, very cogent, and I admire your thinking on this thus far, and think that it not only was a lot of work for both the committee and for your agency, but you've gotten some good results here, and with some further thinking, I mean, it's not going to be easy, but with some further thinking, the entire community could be benefited. Thanks.
Kirk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to thank again Derek and Jennifer, Tom and Kate for all your work. The advisory committee has done a great job, and I particularly want to recognize former Planning Commission member Ned Rep for his work. He's long been an expert in this field, and probably is the father of this study. So thank you for being here today, Mark, and thank you for your contributions. I do have one question before I'll launch into some of my comments. And Tom, Kate, maybe you're the best person. When we talk about the existing process for the TDRs, this was the graph chart on page 13. Do we charge a fee for the landowner to get a TDR certificate of eligibility?
Tom Delaire for the record. Yeah, there is an application and a process that they have to go through and submit. And then there's some review of their packet back and forth with the RGIS department and their consultant to verify the areas that they're portraying to us, and making sure that we can justify those areas and numbers of TDRs being developed.
Is a fee a flat fee, or is it based on the time, the acreage, the complexity? Can you give me a little education there?
It's a flat fee. I don't recall the number, the amount. Yeah, it's pretty minimal. Yeah, it's a minimal fee.
And then how long would the time frame be if someone would come to you today? How long? Again, I'm sure it would depend on the complexity and the research that you had to do. Are we talking about a month and a half to get a certificate of eligibility, or are we talking about a year and a half?
Well, it depends on what's being presented and the accuracy of the numbers that we can justify and verify with our team and our information that we have at the county. So, I mean, it could be a couple weeks to process to a couple months, just depending on how complex those are. And in the past couple records that we've done and processed, you know, we had to figure out the process ourselves because it wasn't really clear to us on reading the code and seeing what past applications were done. It was very inconsistent between everybody's applications, and we fixed that by coming up with some standard forms and procedures so that moving forward it is very consistent and treating everybody equal.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate your doing that and making that as efficient as possible, because I do think time is money, and as much as we can streamline and simplify that process would be helpful. Let me launch into a couple of things, and I'm kind of working off of the questions for consideration that were on page 33, because I think, Derek, you developed those very well. So I'll try and just respond in order with some of my thoughts. What are your thoughts on the TDR program today? Needs improvement. Are the goals still relevant? Yes, absolutely. The thoughts about the recommendations? I agree totally with the best practices slide that you put up there. That's very, very important to get those in place. I do agree with the advisory committee. I think option 1 and option 2 are the best things to move forward with now. But I would be reluctant to go on further. I think we do, as a number of other people have mentioned, need to integrate this in with a master plan. I think that's important. And I think that will be a helpful meshing of the goals of the master plan and the goals of the TDR program improvements. What incentives would be appropriate for TDRs? This is one where I sometimes have a little bit of trouble. You talk about high priority sending areas. When you get down to brass tacks, that becomes very difficult for me to consider. How do you evaluate high, medium, and low priority sending areas? Do you get a committee together to do that? Do you let Tom do that? Do you put that by rankings in the master plan? That seems to me to be somewhat fraught with difficulty. The thoughts on changing and sending and receiving areas in the future, does the Planning Commission support revising community plans through the master plan update? Well, I'm only one voice on this, but I think some community plans might not have any TDR relevance. And once we would commit to revising all the community plans, I think, at least in my conversations with staff in the past, that is a very time-consuming and a very costly process. So I think that ought to be considered very, very carefully. And then lastly, is there interest in limiting development areas that are high priority for preservation? Again, it's difficult to say what's high priority. I think it's a little bit easier to say what's high priority for development than it is for preservation. But I'd be, again, reluctant in getting the county too involved in picking winners and losers. I'm very big on the free market. Let the free market determine what's going to happen. If somebody wants to sell the TDRs on their land, they have a right to do that. If somebody doesn't want to, they have a right to do that. If somebody wants to sell their land for a profit, that's the free market. Whether Douglas County should incentivize those private actions, I guess I come down on the side of less government intervention than more government intervention. And then just my one observation, when we talk about this phase 2 and phase 3, we've got options and we've got phases, so I don't want to confuse those. Options 1 and 2 I like. When we get to the phases, when we get to phase 2 and phase 3, and you're talking about $500,000 for those, that's a good chunk of change. I'm not on the Board of County Commissioners, but I do listen to their discussions and the difficulties they have in making spending priorities. And to me, I think those are something that would have to be looked at very carefully when you're spending that amount of money on this program, which is important, but we have, as the commissioners always said, we have many priorities. So thank you very much again. The work that everybody in this room has done is outstanding, and I really appreciate the time and effort that you have spent.
Thank you. Bryce?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too thank the two of you and everybody who's participated in this process and for the presentation. I always question why I'm sitting here, but I think it's because a small group of folks felt I was worthy. There are times my career experience benefits my role as a planning commissioner, and there's times it doesn't. I was told as a young man that I had 2 ears and 1 mouth and that I should listen to learn. Throughout my career, it's been important to understand what I know and what I don't know. There are several men and women in this audience today that I have a tremendous amount of respect for, who are multi-generational Nevadans in this county or have participated in these discussions for decades. And so for me, it's important to hear from you and what you believe will be in both your personal and family's best interest and that of the long-term preservation of open space and agriculture in this county, if that's indeed what you want. I believe the best way to get anything done is to get the appropriate stakeholders in the room, and it appears we might have accomplished that here. I believe there's a lack of transparency and education as part of this program, and that needs to be addressed. However, I believe the biggest issue is pure economics and market factors. This challenge very much resembles the growth ordinance issue, where we have spent a lot of time working on how to control growth when the market has held it at bay as much as half of the ordinance since its inception. I'm not a rancher, so I don't believe I'm equipped to dictate to any of you when and how much you can sell your land. And so I want to hear from you as to what your ideas are that may or may not accomplish both of these objectives. Again, I'm here to listen and learn and to do my part as a planning commissioner to help, but I believe that ultimately this comes down to private land issues, market conditions, and how we collectively as a community can accomplish those goals.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to open public comment and invite the TAC members to come forward, sign the roster, please. What, Paul?
Thank you. For Director Dallaire, if, as I have read the materials, there really is no public input with respect to either the definition or the characteristics of a sending area, except for those that you put on the slide from the master plan and from the development aspect. So otherwise, those are the only guidelines that I could tell for a sending area that exist. Would it benefit or would it take more time, an unduly amount of time, to have public input as to how valuable they saw, thought of, and the surrounding communities, the value of a particular sending area? In other words, they would have a very good idea about how valuable it would be, those that currently live here. Do you see what I'm saying? Or would that type of process just take too much time, such that it's not, the juice isn't worth the squeeze?
Well, Tom Dallaire for the record. I think the juice is worth the squeeze on this one, but the problem we have is which one's going to come first. The recommendations for the TDR and the code update. Once we get those, we don't have to implement the code and the ordinance until we get the master plan updated. But if this is something that we are going to move forward with, I heard that 4 times from the 7 commissioners on we got to update the master plan. Well, we do, but we need a program that we think will work, and then we can incorporate it into the master plan. The code really comes first, and then the master plan comes after that, and we develop what we need. I think we need sending areas located. I think it would be easier for us to calculate the value of a TDR, the number of TDRs off of the property. There are a lot of forest and range lands in this valley that we have floodplains that haven't actually been modeled yet. Mainly the airport wash, and we're working on getting those done. But right now we don't know where the flooding is. We saw some areas in 2023 where the Pine Nut areas flooded, and we have a lot of development that has happened since the 70s in those areas that are now flooding. And it's not just that now flooding, but it's flooding within the 100-year storm type of event, in which we are having. And now we have a fire last week, and now we're going to have more water coming down of the pine nuts out of the pine nut wash than we've ever had before. This is starting to get mission critical, at this point. So the direction I received from the county management when I first started 5 years ago was that we needed to do a TDR study. The TDR study we felt needed to come before the master plan update. The master plan update needs to be budgeted, and we're planning on budgeting that next year. So next March, we'll be having the conversations about how much are we going to budget for the master plan. And I got to have a TDR study kind of giving us the directions that we're going to go. The public has been very vocal in going back out to every community area and coming up with a new plan. And if that's the desire of the board, that's what we'll do. And that's what we need to kind of focus on at that time. But in the meantime, we got to come up with some sort of idea on what this program looks like and if we really need it or don't need it. Because we do have, you guys are right, there is a growth management ordinance and it hasn't done what it was intended to do. And we're going to be running into some issues here shortly with that, coming up, and we'll have to implement it per code and have everybody who wants to develop houses in the future, come and apply for that right to do those, and that's going to cause some issues as well. So mainly management issues on our end, and how we're gonna divvy out these allocations. So it is something that's coming up, and it's coming quickly. Is the other thing. So the master plan is important, and we definitely need to update it, and we need to go through that expense. But it is costly, as you guys have reported.
Thank you very much.
So the answer is we need to do this first. Okay.
That was a short answer. Good job.
All right. Thank you very much. Mark, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. My name is Mark Ninnert, for the record, and I've listened to you guys talk up here, and the TDR program is very confusing unless you know all of the history, and the history goes back to about 1980. So what I'd like to do is give the board members a little history lesson here, and also the consultants. Back in the early 80s, Douglas County prepared the very first master plan. At that time, the entire valley was zoned A1, meaning anybody in agricultural land or in the city could build a house on a 1 acre parcel. No questions, just go ahead and do it. When this master plan came through, what the county commissioners at that time decided was, well, this is kind of silly. We want to have a little control, so they downzoned all the agricultural landowners to A19. That's when the TDR concept came about. The powers that be said, we're going to take away your development rights, but we're going to give you a TDR instead, because it's not fair to just take away something. And so they gave you the TDR. Now, unfortunately, back in the 80s, they only gave one TDR for every 20 acres or 19 acres. And that didn't work because no rancher wanted to get rid of his 20 acre or 19 acre TDR, and no person moving to the area could afford a 19 acre TDR. So it absolutely did nothing. It sat dormant there for many, many years. During the meantime, the commissioners said, well, gosh, we got to have some growth. And so what they did is they started handing out zoning to developers. In 1996, the program was revamped. In 1996, they gave out many TDRs for every parcel, and they had a system that said, hey, if you're going to tie the water to the land, you don't get just one TDR for 20 acres, you get 8 more. And that's where this bonus system came through. And it worked exceptionally well for many years. The trouble is, the commissioners continued to hand out zoning. And so why, as a developer, would I want to go deal with a damn TDR if I could just go to the county commissioners and say, hey, I get this for free, just change my zoning. And that's exactly what happened. So what needs to happen, if I was king, what would happen? I would say, you know what, damn it, we're not going to change any zoning. You want to come here? You want to build a project? I'm going to give you a receiving area. We'll let you go out and get your own TDRs. That way, we're accomplishing what the original goal was. We're saving some open space out there, and you guys can build your houses based on how many TDRs you buy. There's talk about getting rid of the receiving areas. I never said we should get rid of receiving areas, nor do I think we should. In fact, what we should do is enhance the receiving areas so that people want to get a receiving area versus, being able to do what they're doing now, which is just come ask for zoning and the county commissioners give it out. TDRs was a misnomer. What we should have called it back then is, it's a tax. It transfers wealth. It transfers wealth from the new homeowner to the rancher who is, saying, okay, I won't build. We should call it an impact fee. We shouldn't call it a TDR fee. For crying out loud. How many impact fees do we have on a new house? You have a school impact fee, you got a road impact fee, you got a fire fee. Hell, the parks even have an impact fee. And I'm sure I'm missing many, many of them. But for this program to be successful, what we have to do is, unfortunately, get the county involved. Because a poor developer isn't going to want to run around and chase down 10 damn ranchers who are all going to be gruff and cranky. He just wants to go to the county and say, hey, you gave me the receiving area. I now need 20 of these TDR things, or whatever you want to call them. We should probably change the name. And that way, the developer knows the set price before they walk in, and it makes development a whole lot easier. Should the TDR program continue? Yes, I believe it should, but is it working now? The answer is absolutely not. The trouble is, we're handing out zoning without requiring somebody to have a receiving area which would require these transfer of development rights. But yeah, in 1996, I don't know if Jock was there in the 80s when this thing was first originated. In 1996, I think it was Rob Anderson that came through and said, well, the reason it's not working is because we don't have enough TDRs. So he created this big bonus schedule that, if you have 100 acres, you get a bonus of 1 or 2. The schedule's right in the code. If you're irrigated ag land, you get 8 more, only if you tie the water to the land. And there were several other things that gave you additional bonuses, meaning if you were in the flood zone, you got some bonuses. So they did go through and try to come up with a bonus system to make this work, and that's why it worked well. Then we had the recession, and then everybody started handing out zoning, and it went away. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Jacques, we get to blame you.
For the record, Jacques Etchegoyen, and I'd like to say how appreciative this community is of your public service, because and my background, my degree's in planning, and I had a professor at UC Davis who always kind of chuckled and said, well, asphalt's the last crop, and by God, he was right. So Mark covered a lot of the issues that I was going to cover, and he did it well as an accountant and a person who knows numbers far better than I. But when we adopted this plan in 1996, and we did win the National Planning Award for the United States with this plan, and we're one of 4 counties in the United States that had TDRs, and I'm here to say it is not perfect. It needs tweaking. I hope you believe it's worth keeping because it has been successful. If we had tried to protect that 4,000 acres in today's market, we'd need $100 million, and that's already done. And through a couple other clients and various mechanisms, we're up to about 18,000 acres forever protected in Douglas County, including humongous donations done on the Walker River down south. And, so we're in a very enviable position. I always say when my mom grew up in Reno, it was smaller than Minden and Gardeville is today. And they probably wish they'd had a TDR program. It'll work. It needs some tweaking, needs some thought. I think you've got the right folks in the room to get there. And just to put things in perspective, when we adopted this master plan in 1996, the median home price in Carson Valley was $150,000. It's now $680,000. But the TDR price hasn't changed a bit. And as Mark said, and I'll go back to an old Carson Valley ranch saying, Dal Byington, who sat up here as chairman for 20 years, we did a 700-acre TDR conservation easement with him, but he said, if you give the milk away for free, they'll never buy the cow. The same is true with development rights. Thank you very much for your time and effort.
Thank you, Jacques. Next speaker.
Didn't mean to cut you off. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is David Hoosman, Carson Valley rancher whose family has benefited from this program 20-some years ago, back when it was actually working. I think we're making a false comparison between the full value of the land and the value of the development rights, because if you don't mind selling the land, great, good for you. If you want to keep it and you want to get some of the value out, that's where the development rights are valuable. And when you walk out the door after you've done this, you still own the land, which is not worth zero. So I think it all comes back to the landowner and how motivated they are to keep the property in its current state. As far as any tweaks that might be, when we implemented this plan in the late 80s, the idea was you could build houses, but you could also do commercial or industrial if the use was appropriate in that area. All I've heard talk so far today is we're only talking about homes. I don't know if that has changed over the years. I think if it has, we ought to look at changing it back. I think about the piece off of Long Valley that just got approved for some housing, and I think that could have been maybe some neighborhood commercial, maybe even some light industrial if people want a place to work. I don't know. Maybe it's not appropriate, but I think it's worth looking at. So I think let's keep the program because it is of value. The political will part that Mark talked about is very important. And I think if we have that, we have a lot better chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoosman. Any others? Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you, and I never mind going behind the skills and talent of these three individuals that have spoken before me. So my name is Mark Gardner. Yes, I'm a county commissioner, but what I'm going to say is not reflective of the board of commissioners and is primarily questions. Okay, as has been mentioned before by you. We have a toolbox, and this, should we keep this program, would just remain one tool in that toolbox. That's the only comment I'll make. However, I do have three questions, okay? And you began to touch on them, but I don't think we went into them in a deep enough manner. Number one is we issue certificates for TDRs. How many do we currently have filed? How many do we have filed? Number two, the number that we do have filed, are they sufficient to meet the needs of the currently approved development? So do we need more or do we need less? Do we have enough? And then, Mr. Walter, you were alluding to it. How do we determine which are utilized first? Where's the prioritization? So how do you determine that? Those are three key questions I think need to be asked. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
A question to that, because I'm hearing this being used as a tool in many ways. I'm hearing that we want to use it for floodplain management. Now, who's going to buy that land and how does that work? And are there other tools we should be using for floodplain management? And Are we doing as Hope said, building what we've got because of the tools we've got? Are there some other tools that we should be considering using for some of these goals that we have, that are valid goals? We're not arguing about the value of managing our floods or potential flooding, but is this a tool to use for that? It could be, but how, and is that currently considered in this proposal? And I guess the other thing I'm confused about is, on the one hand, we have 6,000 homes currently permitted. I'm living in the middle of a ton of construction, and I think it was just asked, do we need this right now, or is this the right tool for where we are in our development in our community or not? Don't know. It's an interesting tool. I'm sure it has its purposes, but there might be other tools that might be more appropriate at this time, or at least might inform how we craft this tool to meet where we are as a community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Seeing none? Oh, Jim? Got to be quick.
Jim Slade. Our local ranchers, of course, deserve our thanks and respect for their many years of stewardship of the land and the preservation of the open space that we all love. At this point, however, we also have to consider the other 50,000 residents of the county. I am always a bit suspicious of stakeholder groups. They tend to be principally limited to those who would financially benefit from the issue at hand, while the general public, who might feel the negative effects of the issue, as in this case, are left completely out of the discussion, except on the periphery. When you have a majority of participants in a meeting desirous of maximizing advantages for large landowners, then that lobbying effect will affect the thought processes of the attending county commissioners, planning commissioners, and consultants. I'd like to reference a couple of the charts that were out. The TDRs versus land values, if you could put those up. With selling TDRs, as Mr. Hoosman indicated, they would still own the land, and they could work that land, and then later they could sell that land. That's not indicated. And when you sell the land for $3 million, once you pay your taxes, you might have $2 million. So that 4.2 number is very deceptive. We could do this one also. On the TDR versus land values on the other page, the idea of increasing the bonuses for TDRs is, to me, not a good idea. We already have incentivized high priorities areas with, as Mr. Someone else was saying there earlier, my friend, Mr. Nedenreep. They increased the bonuses for land in the floodplain, for including the water rights, for parcels of 100 acres or more. I don't think those should be increased at this point. In fact, I like Ms. Lyle's idea of decreasing the value of the much less desirable land. But I don't understand the theory that by increasing the valuation that we would preserve more land, we would preserve less land. If someone needs 600 TDRs and it's 1 for 1, that's 600. If it's 3 for 1, they only need 200. And so you're preserving, maybe you're accelerating growth, which is not what anyone wants. We got enough growth going on as it is. You would, in the long run, preserve less land. So there's that consideration. I do also commend Commissioner Lyle for her comment that existing taxpayers should not be paying for additional growth. That may not be a popular opinion in this room today, but it is a very popular opinion in the general population of this county. So thank you for reminding us of that.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers? Okay, seeing none, I will close public comment and pull it back to the commission. Any comments from the commissioners before I make mine. Dan?
There was a couple of questions that I haven't heard the answer, and maybe we'll get them when you come back in the fall. And I've got to say, Commissioner Gardner jumped the gun on some of my questions, so thank you for that, sir. And being a numbers guy, I always need to ask, what are the numbers? How many TDRs are out there? How many are needed? I heard one of the presenters state that the program is not sustainable because there's not enough TDRs. So I believe I heard you, I think you said that, didn't you? Anyways, but those are the kinds of questions that I would like to know more about. I already mentioned we've got 4 major housing goals. It would be nice to get a little bit of background as to how we're doing on those housing goals. And as I said, my particular interest is sustainability of our commitments to do maintenance for the things we've accepted. I agree with the comment about the false equivalency between selling TDRs and selling the land. My first thought was, yeah, but you got the land, so what's the value of that? I get your point. If your children don't want to have anything to do with ranching, maybe that goes into your personal decision as to what you do. Again, the sustainability question, what is needed in terms of being a sustainable program? We've talked a little bit about the valley issue. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but maybe I don't have a high enough appreciation for the Topaz area. But you've got all those TDRs shown on your map from that area, and I'm going, why would that be a priority for preservation over intensification of development along Toller and Buckeye, basically, in that area where all the units have been approved? That doesn't make sense to do the valley-to-valley program, but then again, maybe the numbers are so small it doesn't really matter. So again, the devil can be in the details. Anyways, those are just some of my questions that I would hope that we would get to in the next presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Jim?
First of all, I do want to thank, because that was remiss earlier, and the efforts of both community development and your organization. Really appreciate it. I thought the most illuminating comments came from people who have been around a lot longer than I have in this valley. And I thought it just really hit me over the head when it was said that the program worked until the county started handing out zoning. And I thought that would just hit me over the head as being very significant in what changed, why a program worked and doesn't work now. So I really appreciate, again, Mr. Neddenriep and Mr. Echegoyen and just the comments that gave me a lot of background that I didn't necessarily have. Thank you.
Paul?
There's been a lot of discussion that comes out of a fundamental understanding that when you transfer a development right, you're transferring all of that right. Let me give you an analogy. Think of a piece of property, and I basically, I don't think that's necessary. That's consistent with my prior comments. If you think about a piece of property as a bundle of sticks that you hold in your hand, right now we're taking half or more of that bundle of sticks if you're going to be selling the rights to someone for the privilege of putting more units on a given piece of property, the receiving property. If we put those sticks back in, so I have a full handful, I have the whole property, and we're looking at a sending area that's extremely valuable, then maybe, in this instance on a TDY, with some creative thinking, you take just a few of those sticks and you leave some residual value for some type of future development or other use, and you leave that with the landowner. You therefore have a value that you're leaving with the landowner on the sending, and you're adding value to the receiving landowner because there's more units available, but you tag something with it on that TD, that transfer, that right DR. And like I gave the and the example of an orchard's not good for this valley, but you understand what I mean. I just think that it's a valuable program, and with some tweaking and some creative thinking, I think that it would be even more valuable in the future. And I echo the commissioner's comments and also ex-commissioner Niederup's comments, that you don't want changes in the zoning to overshadow what the master plan was without a darn good reason. And then you should use the transfer of development rights. Thanks.
Lori?
I just have one comment. The concept that this right would be available for more than just a residential unit is intriguing to me. So possibly expand this so that it also can be utilized to develop additional commercial or industrial land, I think would be something that is worth exploring at least.
Kirk? Bryce? My turn. I want to thank Mark and Jacques for the history lesson, and to our speakers for your comments. I noticed Derek is writing furiously, so everything has been noted. And the information will come back to us when this comes back. A few things that I jotted down is that I do believe that there needs to be something with regards to the transfer of TDRs from the watersheds. It's something that when we dealt with the Buckeye Ranch, Buckeye Farms project, and the transfer of development rights from the Walker River watershed to the Carson River watershed, that was brought up. We thought it was codified and it wasn't, and the confusion about that, something needs to be written down. There needs to be something in stone that we can depend on. There needs to be something reliable that we have, whether or not it's in code or not, but there needs to be something definite with regards to transferring development rights between watersheds. And it was a very good question that Dan brought up. How many landowners are we dealing with? We know that Park and Bentley are very large landowners in Douglas County. How many other large landowners, how many small landowners are we dealing with? And yes, I think the opportunity to piggyback with TRPA is a wonderful idea. And I think, as have the other commissioners, that considering most of this with the master plan update is very, very important. It saves a lot of costs and a lot of time because we have to do the update anyway. And I think with regards to infrastructure and the housing, providing quality of life issues, cost is something that we have to keep in mind, because with everything that comes before us when we're considering a subdivision, we have to be mindful of the quality of life and whether or not infrastructure can be supported. We make a recommendation, it goes to the Board of Commissioners. They have to make a decision based on our recommendation, which we have considered costs. And so when you bring this back, that's something that I would like you to consider in this. And I do seriously believe that this program, as has been said, this is just one tool. Conservation is something that everyone wants to do, whether you're a longtime resident or whether you're brand new to the area. We can't stop growth. It's going to happen. And no one wants to see a San Fernando Valley or even a Washoe. No one wants to see that. But we can't look to government to do it all. And I think that's what's happening, is you get people who come in here and say, fix it. And the government cannot do it. So we have this one tool that the government can utilize, but the message has to go out loud and strong that the community has to pull together to utilize what they can do, whether it's a land trust that's privately funded, or it's an open space district through a 1/4-cent sales tax, which we all know that 376A, which is found in the NRS, is going to sunset, and we need to put pressure on the legislature to change that wording. Word has come back that they're not going to, but we as individuals can do what we can do to put pressure on the legislature to change that. And those are pretty much my comments. Again, thank you to the Technical Advisory Committee, to our staff, and to the consultants, and to the Planning Commission, and to everyone who cares about the process and who cares for Douglas County for being here. With that, if there are no other questions from the Commission, I will open closing public comment and ask anyone who has comments to come to the microphone. Seeing no one, I will close public comment and remind everyone there is no July Planning Commission meeting. Have a wonderful July, and we will see you in August.